I don't know whether you've read the words that are on that topic, but it's pick one word for your life. So I picked the word possibility or potential. And she said, no, I think your word is ConceivAbility, because what we conceive, we are able to accomplish. You cannot accomplish anything until you first believe it. So my journey started about 29 years ago. And how many of you guys have ever just known what was going to happen? You're so sure that something's going to occur, and then all of a sudden you have a change of plans. You just know that that job is going to come through. You just know that you're going to marry that girl. You just know that you're going to have the perfect life. And all of a sudden, your plans change. That's what happened to me when I was 12 weeks pregnant with my first child. I was so excited to be pregnant and to be expecting this child. And at 12 weeks, we did an ultrasound because I was having some challenges with the pregnancy. And the doctor said, we think your baby has Down syndrome. And I went, no, can't be true. Not my baby. But we didn't embryo, and it was true. But I have to tell you, sometimes God knows better than us. And all of those things that I grieved over, all of those things that they told me that Curtis was not going to do, all of those things that I thought were impossible were not true. Let's see if I can work this. Well, it's on. It's green. I'm assuming green is on. Flip it over. Oh, no wonder. Thank you, Sean. Sometimes. So, I want to tell you a little bit about people with Down syndrome and what's happening in the world currently. This is not what my talk is about, but I think it's something that you guys need to be aware of. Would it be better if I use a handheld? Yeah, okay.
I'll get it for you.
Oh, thank you. So, in 20 years, in 20 years, it's very likely that there will be no more people. In 20 years, it's very likely that there will be no more people born with Down syndrome. There are nations in the world that are actually out to eradicate Down syndrome. I did a TED talk on it 2 years ago, and you can actually look it up if you're interested. It's called The Eradication of Down Syndrome. And it talks about what happens when we start eliminating people that we think are not worthy. So right now, actually these statistics are from 8 years ago. There are no current statistics. Pardon me. A tissue. I apologize. So these statistics are from 8 years ago. No current statistics are available, but in the United States, almost every fetus is tested for Down syndrome. Not so much other things, but definitely for Down syndrome. And of those fetuses that are prenatally diagnosed, 67% are terminated in the United States. 77% was the last number we had in France. Countries such as Denmark, Ireland now, Iceland, Zimbabwe, and a number of others, that number is almost 100%. In fact, in the last 10 years in Iceland, we only know of 3 children born with Down syndrome that entire time. The incidence of Down syndrome is 1 in every 650. That, I could spend all day talking about that, but that's not what my talk is about. My talk is about what happens when we put people in a box. What happens when we determine that somebody is not capable of something because of their potential diagnosis. So, and that can happen to each and every person in this room. It can happen to your employees. It can happen to anyone in your life. That somebody says, you just don't have what it takes. So, I saw this recently and I thought it was very appropriate, especially for today. Kirk Douglas and Ace in the Hole, a movie from 1951, says, bad news sells best because good news is no news at all. So when you are diagnosed, when your child is diagnosed with Down syndrome, you are told all of the things that are not going to happen. They explain the diagnosis, they tell you that it is an extra chromosome, but then the things that they told me in my particular case were my son was never going to walk, my son was never going to talk, my son was never going to read, my son was never going to have a functional life, and my son basically wouldn't be worthwhile. So that was told to me before his birth, and termination was encouraged, but it was also told to me when he was 2, when he was 3, when he was 4, when he was 5, and on up until I decided we wouldn't be in the system anymore. So when you have that, your life revolves around worry, weight, and you lose that hope and that expectation. When you have that situation where everybody is constantly telling you you can't, how many times have you guys wanted to be able to do something, but somebody in your life told you you couldn't? How many times when you were a kid, did you think, oh, I'm gonna go try to play the violin or play a guitar or be in a rock band or whatever it was? And you were told, yeah, we don't think you're very good at that. When I was a teenager, I used to sing a lot. I was in a lot of bands, a lot of performances. I was in, oh my goodness, every band and performance they would let me be in, I was in. And I actually had one time thought about majoring in music in college. And a friend came up to me and said, yeah, I don't really think you should do that. I don't know that you have that kind of voice. Maybe you should just find another major. And do you know that really convinced me? Her words were what convinced me not to be a music major and to go into something else. Now God works everything out for our good, and it worked out just fine. But somebody's opinion swayed what I chose to do for a living. And how many times does that happen in our lives? You can imagine how many times that has happened in my son's life. Ephesians 3:20 says, now to him who is able to do far more than we ask or imagine or think, according to the power at work within us. So my son, who was never supposed to walk, who was never supposed to talk, who was never supposed to read, started showing potential. He started showing those possibilities. And the reason that he began to believe that he could was he had somebody to believe in him. You know, I don't think I could stand up here today and talk to you guys if I didn't have somebody to believe in me. I have a good friend who is also a professional speaker. He goes on really big stages and a lot of major stages, and he always tells me, look, you've got this. I know you and you've got this. And we each need somebody to believe in us like that. So maybe as I'm speaking today, you can't think of somebody who necessarily can do that for you, although if you don't have somebody in your life who's doing that, then I encourage you to go get somebody, but maybe you guys can do that for somebody else, because we each need somebody in our life who's able to tell us what we can do, not what we can't do. So potential starts with believing that everyone has value and everyone has a purpose on this planet. In 2017, I wrote a book and published a children's book called When I Ordered You. And that children's book talks about when I ordered you, my son. And it says, I ordered you with hair like mine, but you got your dad's hair and it looks very handsome on you. I ordered you as a girl, but you were a boy that liked puppies and mud and trucks. And it goes through and talks about the challenges we faced. But the last page says, I may have had you all planned, but God knew better. His factory never makes mistakes. And you know, that's one thing that we have worked on all through my son's life, was telling him that he was not a mistake. I don't care if he has Down syndrome. Actually, Down syndrome is something extra, not something that's taken away. It is it's a chromosomal anomaly. It's not really a deformity, as some people call it. It's an anomaly where a third piece connects to the 21st chromosome. And I just got back from this wonderful conference in Pittsburgh, and they told us about all of the things that are advances that are being made because we have people with Down syndrome in the world. We have advances in Alzheimer's. We think that there may be a cure. I just got an email yesterday that there is a drug that has now come out that's an injection that is looking very promising for curing Alzheimer's. We would not have that drug without people with Down syndrome, because Alzheimer's presents on the 21st chromosome. And so they are able to do research on mice that they give Down syndrome. They create these mice that have Down syndrome, and as a result, they're able to do Alzheimer's research. So I could get into that all day, but I want to talk to you about believing in the possibilities. So sometimes you have to see the possibilities when the rest of the world doesn't. Sometimes you have to believe what's possible. You know, potential starts with believing that God doesn't make mistakes. And when we achieve our purpose, God gives us the seeds to accomplish greater things. It has been an interesting journey with Curtis. He didn't walk till he was almost 5 years old. And I was told to give up and put him in a wheelchair. But I want you to know that now he plays basketball. And he actually runs up and down the court, and he's a really talented basketball player. Jeremiah 29:11 says, For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. And I believe that that's true for each and every one of us. You know, we are uncomfortable when things don't go the way that we had planned. We are uncomfortable when somebody looks a little different. We are uncomfortable when life is not going quite the way it seems like it should. But it's in that discomfort that we find our growth. It's in that discomfort that we find our abilities. It's in that discomfort that we find the path that God designed for us to take. So many times, the things that I think, oh my goodness, I really don't want to go through, I really wish this wouldn't have happened, those are the things that wind up being the best. Those are the things that wind up being the most profound experiences in my life that lead me onto the path that I should be on. Without those experiences, without those opportunities, then I wouldn't have found my strength. And so my son has taught me so much about finding my strength. When he was about 7 or 8 years old, he was in a public school, it doesn't matter which one in this city, and I had sent him to school reading sight words. I had sent him to school being able to basically understand, comprehend language. However, as they convinced him that he was just memorizing books, which is what sight word reading is, instead of reading, he stopped reading and became less sure of himself. So at 8 years old, I was told that he was never going to read and I should just give up. For years, I thought maybe that was a possibility. But I want to tell you guys that sometimes it's when people tell you that you can't, that you become inspired to prove them wrong. And that is what happened in our case. How many times has somebody said, no, you're not going to do that, and you're like, wait, yes, I am going to do that. Well, that's what happened in our case. When my son was 13, he learned, we found a new reading method, and he began to read phonetically. I thought reading phonetically was impossible at that point because I was being influenced by the people who told me that this was not possible. I want to tell you guys today that my son is a Shakespeare scholar. The other day he came to me and he said, Mom, I need you to order The Two Noble Kinsmen. And I said, well, first of all, I don't know what The Two Noble Kinsmen is. Who wrote it? And I used to teach Shakespeare and I used to teach theater. So he said, oh, Mom, Shakespeare, of course. So I looked it up and I couldn't find it. And I went back to him and I said, honey, I think you're wrong. Maybe you're mistaken. And he's like, no, Mother. When he calls me Mother, I know I'm in trouble. And he said, no, Mother, I'm not wrong. I'm not mistaken. He said, please go look it up again. So I went and looked it up. Turned out it was a recently discovered play that Shakespeare co-wrote with John Fletcher. He said, yes, Mother, I really need that play. I need to compare it and contrast it with The Merchant of Venice, as well as Taming of the Shrew, I believe it was. My point to that is that if I would have given up, if I wouldn't have believed in his potential and encouraged him to believe himself in his own potential, then that never would have happened. Every day, he spends about 3 hours reading his Bible. He is an amazing biblical scholar. Recently, I was teaching a Sunday school class, and my son came to me. We were studying the book of Nehemiah, and in the middle of me speaking, he raises his hand. And he's very insistent, as only our children can be. And he said, Mom, excuse me, when I was trying to ignore him. And he said, Mother, I need to let you know that before you study the book of Nehemiah, you really need to study the book of Ezra. It is what gives it the context. So I have to say that I went back and we studied the book of Ezra and then finished with Nehemiah. You know, sometimes people have amazing potential, but they're never given that opportunity to show it. I was recently listening to Carly Fiorini's book, Finding Your Way, I believe it is. She was the CEO of Hewlett-Packard, and she is a believer, and she's an amazing woman. And she was talking about this man that was under her in a particular department. And she said that Bill was his name, and he was always really quiet. And he really never had much to say. And she really didn't think the guy had a whole lot of potential. In fact, she was wondering why he was working in her department, in her company. And one day, in a meeting, she said, does anybody know how we could implement some cost-cutting measures in this field? And Bill raised his hand, and he said, well, it all has to do with the billing. And she said, what? He said, it all has to do with the billing. And this man, who had never spoken, who had never really said anything, who she actually was thinking about getting rid of, was someone who had an amazing mind and an amazing ability, but that potential was not being recognized. He wound up saving that department and their company millions upon millions of dollars. And yet, if she had never asked that question, if she had never asked for input, if she had never allowed someone to step out, then that never would have happened. So every single person has the choice to have potential, but we have to choose to use it. We need to encourage everybody's strengths and passions. We need to encourage each other's strengths and passions. Sometimes we get so caught up in what we need and what we want. You know, the other night I was having a conversation with a friend, and she needed a listening ear. And I thought, oh man, okay, I'm gonna listen. And it was one of those things I had a lot on my mind. And then she stopped the conversation and she said, thank you for listening. Now, what would you like to talk about? And I went, oh, okay, it's reciprocal. And so many times, we get so engaged in us that we forget to appreciate others' passions. We need to encourage those things in each other. We need to give people rules and expectations and hold them to it. Can somebody please give me the time I have? Don't put my watch up here.
It's 8:42.
Okay, I've got a few more minutes. Okay, we need to give people the rules and expectations and hold them to it. You know, my son is somebody who is a stickler for good manners, but he wasn't always. When he was 5 years old, he and I had a stubborn contest. So he had been in preschool that day, and when I came to pick him up, his teacher said, he has just been awful today. He was not paying attention, he was disobeying, he didn't follow the rules. I said, okay, well then he can tell you he's sorry and we'll talk more about it when we get home. He told me no, he was still signing more than speaking at that time, and he told me no, he wasn't going to say